The World War II Raiders are just a remarkable group of special forces that were trained to go in and do really, your show is called The Point of the Spear, the Tip of the Spear, and that's really what they were. They would go in and do raids, quick, fast traveling very quickly. They were tremendous hand-to-hand combat warriors. They used their knives, stilettos, and had a lot of very special tactics that they used during the war.
An excerpt from today's guest, speaking about a legendary World War II Special Forces outfit that lasted less than 22 months. Author Carole Avriett is here, and I'll speak with her about her book on the Marine Raiders right after this break. I'm Robert Child, and this is Point of the Spear. Next time you're on YouTube, check out our Point of the Spear YouTube channel. We've got bonus video material from the podcast, plus tons of military history videos, including full-length documentaries. It's a great way to spend some time, and don't forget to subscribe while you're there, and click the bell icon so you'll be notified of all the great weekly videos we're uploading. Welcome back. Today's guest grew up in a military family. She graduated from the University of California, Davis with a double major BA in English and History, specializing in military history. She served as the Holmes editor with Southern Living magazine for nearly 15 years. Her seventh and current book is called Marine Raiders, the true story of the legendary World War II battalions. And author Carole Engle Avriett joins us now. Carole, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's our honor. This is a fascinating history this unit has. Did you grow up in a military family? Do you have a military background?
Yes. My father was career Navy. He and my mother divorced not soon after World War II. He had joined just prior to World War II, so he was in it through the entire time. But I did get to meet him when I was about 8 years old. He was returning from the Orient. A very fascinating fella. When he got out of the Navy, he worked for the FAA, got his private pilot's license. My own stepdad, the day after he graduated from law school in December 1941, signed up, joined the very next day, and he was in North Africa, Sicily, and up the boot of Italy with General Mark Clark. And my father's brother, my Uncle Jasper, decided that he wanted some adventure in his life. So when the American Veterans Group began, the AVG volunteer group, he joined up and was the chief mechanic for General Claire Lee Chennault of the Flying Tigers in China. So I grew up with men that had fascinating stories about World War II, and it's just been my privilege and honor to be able to record some of those incredible stories from that era recently. So it's just an honor for me to do this.
Absolutely. What was it that drew you to the Marine Raiders, and what makes this unit stand out? I really did not know much about the Marine Raiders, and as I have done my research over the past 4 years on them, I'm not the only one. A lot of people who are sort of World War II history buffs, but focus more on the European theater, and I think that's especially true of the general reading public. We just know more about Europe, and most people have been to Paris, perhaps, or, Italy, but you don't hear too many people say, oh, I just can't wait to go on my 2-week vacation to Guadalcanal. And, it's just a different area. But as I got into it and as I learned more about it, the war in the Pacific really was ferocious and going 2 years before what we usually mark as the beginning of our major involvement in Europe is D-Day, the Normandy invasion, even though we had already been in North Africa, obviously, and Sicily and Italy some. But I was just drawn to it, and I went to a Marine Raider reunion a few years ago and got to meet some of these World War II heroes personally. And if it's all right, I'd like to share one particular story. Sure.
One of the Raiders that I met at that reunion a few years ago was a gentleman by the name of
the Swede Blomberg, and he was called the Swede for the obvious reasons. Great big tall guy, 6'4", a World War II raider of wonderful stories. And I just absolutely love talking to him and hearing his stories. And part of my meeting him was one of the things that convinced me I wanted to write about the Raiders. So I included him in the book of one of four young men that I focused on especially. And Rob, unfortunately, last night I got a phone call from his family, and Ed passed away at 9 o'clock. He was 101 years old, turned
Wow.
101 this past December 22nd. And just a remarkable man. His story is in the book from start to finish. After the war, he spent nearly the rest of his life as a missionary in the rainforest of Belize. And there's an incredible story in there. He sustained a very shattering injury on New Georgia, as a matter of fact, in that campaign of 1943. And that injury in his shoulder lasted him all the way through the time that he was a missionary. But just a spectacular fellow, tremendous stories. And the World War II Raiders are just a remarkable group of special forces that were trained to go in and to do really, your show is called The Point of the Spear, the Tip of the Spear. And that's really what they were. They would go in and do raids, quick, fast traveling. Very quickly, they were tremendous hand-to-hand combat warriors. They used their knives, stilettos, and had a lot of very special tactics that they used during the war. It was just a remarkable research for me. I spent 4 years researching it, and the stories are truly amazing.
Well, we should dedicate this episode to that warrior that just passed away.
Absolutely. Ed, the Swede Blomberg.
Yeah.
So, and our prayers and thoughts go out to his family today.
Absolutely. How did he was one of four? How did you choose the other three?
Choose those ones. When I got into studying about the Raiders, the original Raiders in World War II had 4 battalions. The 1st battalion was activated by the commandant on February 16th, 1942, and about 3 days later, 2nd Raider Battalion was activated, and then in the summer of 42, 3rd Raider Battalion was activated, and then 4th Raider Battalion. Not many, or really no one, had ever covered the Raiders from sort of an umbrella approach, looking down at all 4 battalions, because they were in fact a complete unit of 4 battalions. So as good fortune would have it, I wound up having some wonderful information given to me about a man from 1st Raider Battalion. His family had all of his letters. And when on a trip to Quantico for research, Lieutenant Colonel Joe Shushko, who recently retired from the Marines after 44 years in and around the Marine Corps, he had invited me to see his building where he was gathering World War II memorabilia from the Raiders. And one of the things that he showed me was a folder that was filled with letters written by Lee Manier from the battlefield. So I had access to all of those, access to his family diaries. So he was 1st Marine Raider Battalion. And then I had the privilege and honor of meeting 3 more Marine Raiders, one from 2nd Battalion, one from 3rd, and one from 4th. And all 3 of those men, I was the last one to interview all 3 of those men and take their stories and add them to the book. So I had a great, great story for each of the 4 battalions. And so it just, the structure fell into place after that.
Yeah, that makes sense to interview one from each battalion, that's for sure. In your research over the 4 years, was there a mission that one of these battalions went on that stood out in your mind?
Well, many of the battles that the Marine Raiders of World War II
were involved in, became really rubbing shoulders with names like Montezuma and Tripoli and Belleau Woods for the Marine Corps. You have, for example, 1st Raider Battalion participated in an engagement that was called Edson's Bloody Ridge. It was a 36 to 38 hour nonstop battle that really turned the tide, secured Henderson Field for the Marine Corps on Guadalcanal. But it was a ferocious, bloody battle. In fact, a lot of Marines simply call it the Ridge rather than the Battle of the Bloody Ridge. And Lee Manier was a part of that, and we have some incredible stories from that particular battle. Another one that comes to mind is Carlson's Long Patrol, and that was 2nd Raider Battalion with Carlson's Raiders. They were on patrol in the jungles for 31 days, and no one thought that they would be able to do such a thing. They had minimal food. Sometimes they went 2 or 3 days without food, and we have a firsthand account from the young man that participated in that. His name was Kenny Merrill. And I tell you a funny story about Kenny. When he first became a Raider, they were practicing in the desert in California before they were deployed to the South Pacific. And Evans Carlson was the leader of 2nd Raider Battalion, and his XO was a young man named Major Jimmy Roosevelt, and he was the son of FDR. And so Kenny got to know, of course, Major Roosevelt very well. And when they were out on one of their 25-mile marches, preparing and learning to be a Raider out in the desert, Kenny told me, he said, I'm from Arizona, and any kind of water in the desert, we consider a blessing. And so on one of their stops, he had already emptied his canteen. So he gets down on his hands and knees on the floor of the desert, and he found a puddle, a mud puddle. And so he's on his all fours, and he buries his face down into the mud puddle, and he's licking it up like a dog. And Jimmy Roosevelt, who had very bad eyesight and flat feet, those are kind of some of his trademarks physically. He had on his glasses, and he's walking along, and he had taken his spectacles off to wipe the sweat off, and he doesn't see Kenny down on his all fours, and so he nearly trips over him, nearly falls flat on his face. And of course he gets up now, murmur, I'm cleaning this up a little bit. Oh, what are you doing, Kenny, down there on your, this and that, and gee whiz. And of course that's really cleaned up for what he said.
Sure.
But so Kenny says, well, sir, I'm just down here getting a drink of water. And so Roosevelt says, well, for blankety blank, get up out of that mud puddle. And everybody, of course, just died laughing. Well, they nicknamed Kenny that day, 2nd Raider Battalion, Mudhole. And for the rest of his life, he was called Mudhole Merrill. And in fact, even when he died at 98, his obituary, the title was Mudhole Merrill finally goes home. And we just, I've been with his family, and they are so funny. They say, you can go to a Marine gathering or a reunion, you can say Kenny Merrill, nobody has any idea who you're talking about. But if you say Mudhole Merrill, they know exactly who you're talking about. And what a character he was. And we were talking about Carlson's Long Patrol.
Right.
Mudhole was on that patrol. And in the book, I have his personal eyewitness account. It was excruciating. And I don't see how the guys really made it through that month in the jungle. The jungle was really as much of an enemy as the two-legged ones that they were fighting.
That's for
and
sure.
Kenny's firsthand account is one of the most touching, poignant things I think I've ever read.
Next time you're on YouTube, check out our Point of the Spear YouTube channel. We've got bonus video material from the podcast, plus tons of military history videos, including full-length documentaries. It's a great way to spend some time, and don't forget to subscribe while you're there, and click the bell icon so you'll be notified of all the great weekly videos we're uploading. They seemed like they were very effective in what they did. What I was confused about was that they were disbanded after only 20 months.
Yes. a little bit longer than 20, around 22 months, thereabouts. What happened, Rob, is that the war in the South Pacific began to grow and to change. As you know, they call those islands leading up to Japan itself as the island ladder, or the chain of islands that they had. And they were like, they would almost like hopping from one lily pad to the next as they moved northward. And from one island to the next, the engagements required more and more men. The Japanese were focusing thousands upon thousands, and we had to respond with thousands and thousands of men. And the engagements became stiffer. They became more necessary of heavier equipment, heavier guns. And so no longer were fast-moving raiding parties, carrying light weaponry, moving quickly to cause disruption and chaos, and then quickly back out. They simply were no longer needed, no longer of import to the engagements that they became involved in. And so the raiders were disbanded, yet folded into the main regular line divisions of Marines, but continued to perform brilliantly in terms of medals that they received and accolades and valor awards along the way. So they continued to do just magnificent things as they went along. The beauty, though, is that in 2006, after decades of not having this special forces unit within the Marine Corps, the foundation was laid to bring back special forces. And in 2014, these special forces, who were at that time called MARSOC, were renamed again by the Commandant, General Amos, according to their ancestry. They were renamed Marine Raiders. And so for about the past 6, 7, 8 years, the Marine Raiders are now back in the Marine Corps. I know that these men who fought in World War II have been so proud of that. And in the reunions of recent years, they have been able to meet a lot of their predecessors that fought so valiantly as special forces in World War II in the Pacific. When I was at Camp Lejeune, in fact, a couple of months ago with the Swede himself, the young Marine Raiders, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, absolutely loved gathering around him. And he was just in his element, 100 years old at the time. And just absolutely, it was just such a thrill to see the interface of the young ones with the ancestry, with their heritage. And so it's just a great, great thing. So
I can imagine, I can picture it. And I did do some research into the Raiders for a book series, the Revived Raiders, and they served in Afghanistan, didn't they?
Absolutely. That was right at the beginning of course, the War on Terror, and that was in the early 2000s. I've met many of those particular warriors that some of them are still in the Marine Corps. Some have since retired. But the tradition of the special forces and the things that they can do, the special skill sets that they have, continue on to this day. Remarkable group of units, fighting forces.
I agree. And into my research, I discovered that their moniker is Silent Warrior. Isn't that correct?
Yes, absolutely. There is a sense that, they go in quickly, undercover, stealthily. There's an absolutely incredible story in my book that I learned about when I was doing my research. This happened as the Marine Raiders in 1st Raider Battalion were headed to Guadalcanal before the invasion on August 1st, 1942, and they had stopped in Noumea. And one night in the officers' club, evidently Colonel Edson, who was the leading commanding officer of 1st Raider Battalion, got into sort of a my guys can do this or my guys can do that with the commander of the base. And they had a radar unit up in the mountains on, actually, I'm sorry, I said Noumea, it was actually Pago Pago.
Mm-hmm.
That they had a radar unit up in the mountains that no one was supposed to be able to get to. It was secret. And Edson said, well, I bet you I've got some guys that can go up there and get through your security. And so on and so forth. He says, so the commanding general said, Edson, there's no way in the world. He said, we've got that place so secure, you'd never get to it. Well, a couple of nights later, the raiders had not only been able to gain access into the radar site, but they left a stiletto stuck in the desk right in front of the radar operator's radio and had gotten back out, and they never knew until they walked into that radar site that morning, and there was this stiletto sticking in the desk. So it's such a great story, and shows you the ability that they had to get things done very, very quietly.
Yeah, that is a great story. Are you working on a new book focused on the military?
Well, I'm casting nets right now. A couple of things that I have in mind. When I did the Marine Raider book, there is a gentleman who is still alive. He was in 1st Raider Battalion. He was only 17 when he joined up. And he was Roosevelt's chauffeur. We drove him around base, and he's got some wonderful stories. But there's also some stories about a Catholic priest that actually went through the Raider training. And he was in Guadalcanal. He went alongside the men, even into battle, and just a remarkable man with some remarkable stories. His story has never been recorded. He's well known in certain circles, but of Marine Corps history and lore. But I'm sort of thinking about that. I would love to maybe do another book on Marine Raiders. But
I'm sure there's definitely a market for it. Your current book, though, is called Marine Raiders, the true story of the legendary World War II battalions, and it's available everywhere. Carole, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, Rob, this has been my absolute pleasure and honor. I thank you so much for having me. And another God bless to the Blomberg family as they celebrate the life well lived in Ed the Swede Blomberg, World War II Marine Raider.
And we're pleased to dedicate this episode to that World War II warrior. Next time, New York Times best-selling history thriller author Steve Berry will be here, talking about his widely popular long-running series featuring main character Cotton Malone.
In each Cotton Malone book, I try to explore another facet of his personality that we have never seen before. And I do that in every book. There's some aspect of his personality that I go into that forms the basis of that story. And you get a pretty good picture of him after 17 books and how he is a different kind of guy than he was in the beginning.
That's next time. And if you like what you hear, leave a review or a rating or just click the follow button. You can find me on Twitter @RobChild, where you can share your comments about the show. I'm Robert Child, and this has been Point of the Spear.
Music licensed from audioblocks.com. Point of the Spear is produced by RSC Media Group.